this document?
The facts are clear and compelling. We know that the individuals who carried out these attacks were part of the worldwide terrorist network, Al-Qaeda, headed by Osama bin Laden and his key lieutenants, and protected by the Taliban.
There, in Lord Robertson's own mouth, at the press conference announcing the delivery of the Taylor report, are the very words from the document itself. The connection is undeniable. This State Department cable contains the talking points for the briefing that Taylor delivered to the North Atlantic Council. Crucially, if unsurprisingly, the document presents absolutely no proof or evidence establishing a link between Al-Qaeda and 9/11. After spending a full 15 pages talking in generalities about terror, about the US government's officially sanctioned history of Al-Qaeda, and of previous attacks linked to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, the document finally arrives at Part 3, purporting to demonstrate Al-Qaeda's involvement in the attacks. But Part 3 begins by admitting that the investigation into the attacks is still in the early stage, and that there are still gaps in our knowledge. It then goes on to detail circumstantial evidence that would not even rise to the level of warranting an indictment, let alone a conviction in a court of law. After asserting without evidence that several of the alleged hijackers had been identified as known bin Laden associates, without clarifying the source of that identification, let alone how their identities and status as hijackers had been determined, we are then told that bin Laden and his associates seemed to be anticipating what we could only identify as an important event or activity. Finally, the document talks about how the incident is tactically similar to earlier attacks, because it involved planning and a desire to inflict mass casualties. And that is it. That is the sum total of the evidence that both the document itself and Lord Robertson, evidently reading notes from Taylor's briefing, calls
clear and compelling.
That this is, in my mind, with no doubt, simply the legal basis for 18 years of perpetual war in the Middle East. This is the basis for NATO's activation of Article 5. And so what is in the document? What is the evidence? What is the evidence which Lord Robertson calls clear and compelling? None. There's absolutely no evidence in that paper. It's free for everyone to see, and I'm sure you'll present it to your audience.
All of this is in keeping with what we have long known about the war on Afghanistan. It was not waged in response to the 9/11 attacks, but was in fact prepared well in advance. Al-Qaeda and the events of September 11th were nothing more than a convenient pretense for the US government to justify their illegal invasion and occupation of a key geostrategic landmass in South Asia. In 1997, just 4 years before the NATO invasion, former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote that, "For America, the chief geopolitical prize is Eurasia. Now a non-Eurasian power is preeminent in Eurasia, and America's global primacy is directly dependent on how long and how effectively its preponderance on the Eurasian continent is sustained." Specifically, Brzezinski pinpointed Afghanistan and its neighbors, an area he called the Eurasian Balkans, as the most geopolitically significant region to control for its gas and oil reserves and mineral deposits. He argued that some form of extended American military intervention in the region would be necessary, warning that a global consensus on its foreign policy imperatives would be impossible, except in the circumstance of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. Later that year, a senior delegation from the Taliban came to the United States for meetings with UNICAL about securing the rights for a gas pipeline from Turkmenistan to Pakistan across Afghanistan. In 2002, it was revealed that the United States had been negotiating with the Taliban to secure those oil interests, and that American negotiators had told the Taliban that they had a choice. You have a carpet of gold, meaning an oil deal, or a carpet of bombs. Shortly after the 9/11 attacks, a former Pakistani foreign secretary revealed to the BBC that a senior American official had told him in mid-July of 2001 that military action against Afghanistan would go ahead by the middle of October. When the Bush administration came into office, its first substantive national security decision directive, NSPD-9, called for military options against Taliban targets in Afghanistan, including leadership, command control, air and air defense, ground forces, and logistics, and was presented to the president on September 4th, 2001, 7 days before 9/11.
Although this national security presidential directive was originally a highly classified document, we've arranged for portions of it to be declassified to help the Commission in its work, and I will describe some of it today. The strategy set as a goal the elimination of the al-Qaeda network and threat, and ordered the leadership of relevant U.S. departments and agencies to make the elimination of al-Qaeda a high priority and to use all aspects of our national power, intelligence, financial, diplomatic, and military, to meet that goal. And it directed the Secretary of Defense to, and I quote, ensure that contingency planning processes include plans against al-Qaeda and associated terrorist facilities in Afghanistan, including leadership, command control and communications, training and logistics facilities, and against Taliban targets in Afghanistan, including leadership, command control, air and air defense, ground forces, and logistics.
Dr. Rice has stated that she asked the National Security Council staff in her first week in office for a new presidential initiative on al-Qaeda. In early March, the staff was directed to craft a more aggressive strategy aimed at eliminating the al-Qaeda threat. The first draft of that approach in the form of a presidential directive was circulated by the NSC staff in June of 2001, and a number of meetings were held that summer at the Deputy Secretary level to address the policy questions involved, such as relating an aggressive strategy against Taliban to U.S.-Pakistan relations. By the first week of September, the process had arrived at a strategy that was presented to principals and later became NSPD-9, the President's first major substantive national security decision directive. It was presented for a decision by principals on September 4th, 2001, 7 days before the 11th, and later signed by the President with minor changes and a preamble to reflect the events of September 11th in October.
The invasion of Afghanistan was not about al-Qaeda. It was not the response of the U.S. government to the evidence connecting the Taliban to al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda to 9/11 that was missing from Ambassador Taylor's report. It was a geopolitical gambit in search of a justification. And the events of 9/11 were the justification that the U.S. used to sell NATO and the world on the war in Afghanistan. Worse, 9/11 was the excuse for the entire war of terror itself, the complete transformation of the Middle East that is taking place thanks to American military might. The Taylor report was a blank check drawn on the events of that day, a check that is still being cashed.
That this is the legal and the moral foundation and political foundation for the launch of the uninterrupted destruction of the Middle East. That's what it is. The 18 years of wars, we have refugees running all over the highways in Europe. Europe is going down for the load of refugees and migrants. And it all started there. It's all emerges from this single document, legally, morally, and politically. That's why this document is important. It is the Achilles heel, like Building 7 is the Achilles heel of the destruction of World Trade Center. So you may be cynical. Okay, then you can be cynical about everything. But if there is any moral left in our Western society, this light should be shined on this document, because this document is the legal, and I say it again, the legal and the moral basis for launching of the NATO wars in the Middle East. And that's something, I think.
17 years of warfare and bloodshed. 17 years of attack and counterattack. 17 years of tears and shattered lives. 17 years of lies. and all of it based on the foundational lie of 9/11 and this virtually unknown document. But now the truth of this deception is in our hands, and it is only by exposing that deception that we can ever hope to derail the wars waged in its name and stop the death and destruction it has wrought.